How did you get started with your career?
I had a paper route when I was a teenager. I much preferred reading the paper in the morning to delivering it. It got me interested in journalism, and I got a job right out of high school as I was getting ready to start at the University of Texas in journalism school at the Austin Statesman covering sports, and I really liked that job. Then after 3 years in journalism at UT, I ran for and got elected editor of the Daily Texan, which is probably the best job I ever had, but you can't do that for more than 1 year. I then worked for United Press International, starting in Texas, and worked in Missouri and Iowa, and eventually got to Chicago. And I took a job as business editor of the Sun-Times, which was also a very good job for a while. And then this opportunity came along to head media relations at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. This is in 1987, and that's how I got there. Jack Sandner was the chairman, and Leo Melamed was the chairman of the executive committee, and Bill Brodsky was the president. But let's go back, Jack and Leo. They were, you would think that the chairman was the top guy, but really wasn't the top guy in those days. The chairman of the executive committee, which was Leo, was the top guy. And he called all the shots. And that changed later when Leo decided to quote unquote retire for like the second or third time, maybe. And then subsequently he unretired and retired again, and several more times, I believe. Those were interesting times because the politics at the Merc then were as crazy, probably a lot crazier than they are now.
What happened when the CME shut their markets during the week of the 1987 stock market crash?
Well, I remember Tuesday morning, I remember working really late Monday night, mostly handling media calls. But Tuesday morning, I got there real early too, because there was an emergency meeting it was either the board or the executive committee, probably the latter. And there were people running in and out. John Davidson was head of clearing at the time, and he looked very concerned. And if he looked concerned, I really trusted. I always really liked John Davidson, thought he was a really smart guy. And if he looked concerned, then I was concerned. And it was basically margin calls. They were worried about certain firms, and I don't remember which ones, that might or might not be able to make their margin calls in the S&P 500. They got it under control, and the markets opened on time. But then the volatility was just as bad as it had been the day before, and that's when the finger pointing started from New York. It became almost an untenable situation. But I basically later learned that there was a lot of negotiation back and forth, and they had agreed to this temporary halt, which in retrospect became really the first circuit breaker, and it actually worked. The market turned around after that too.
What was the fallout from the 1987 crash for the CME?
NYSE and the Wall Street basically versus Chicago, pointing fingers. Nobody wanted to take any responsibility for this. It was computerized trading. They were worried, because there were these things called program trades, and there was this other product called it was a Wall Street product, not a Chicago product, called portfolio insurance, which would set up these big hedges between the S&P futures options and the portfolios of the big proprietary trading firms on Wall Street mainly. Then there's the financial media, the mainstream financial media in New York, and then of course there was also the Washington Post at the time, which never really covered finance to begin with. They saw this as all like a big Chicago-New York rivalry, and if you get in a situation like that, the big guy usually wins. So we realized at the Merc that we had a real perception problem more than an actual business problem, and there was a lot of Bill Brodsky, to his great credit, had a lot of contacts on Wall Street from his time there at the Amex, including Bob Birnbaum. He was at the NYSE at the time and arranged for these meetings between Leo, Jack, Bill, and John Phelan, who was chairman of the exchange at the time. and they negotiated these circuit breakers, which were put into effect pretty quickly. It must have been within a month or two after that. I don't remember exactly. And on top of that, there were all these congressional hearings. Ed Markey was chairman of he was in the House then, and he was chairman of the whatever committee oversaw the SEC, and he convened all these hearings, and there was a lot of finger pointing going on there. And of course, the tried and true Blue Ribbon Committee came into being, both in '87 and then again in '89 or '90 after the FBI sting too, which came up with some really good recommendations for future prevention. Burton Maciel, he was, and Merton Miller. I know Merton Miller was involved in writing doing some kind of academic study on all this, that basically to show that futures weren't to blame. And I think Maciel was involved in that from the Wall Street side as well. That also went a long way too in the PR fight, basically.
Within CME politics, did you lean towards one particular player?
Well, it was pretty clear to me when I was first there that Leo was the top dog, and Jack acknowledged that. I mean, Jack didn't try to buck Leo those first few couple of years as chairman and by the way, Jack was about 10 years Leo's junior.
Yeah.
So he was kind of a protege, Leo had kind of brought him along on a lot of things. And but then you could tell there was sort of a rivalry, a bit of resentment growing, and especially when Leo retired to become chairman emeritus, which I think was in 1990 or so. And Jack was not chairman anymore. John Gelderman was kind of the interim chairman for a couple of years, although nobody knew whether he wanted to continue after that. And he kind of things were kind of at a detente, as it were. But after Leo retired, Jack got himself reelected. It was almost like a coup the way it all happened. But it's a long story. There were other people. There was another guy who thought he was going to be chairman and got the rug pulled out from under him. And it was pretty clear then that Jack wanted to kind of erase Leo from a lot of stuff. And so it was dicey. Really dicey for the last few years I was there. And then Leo made a comeback in the mid 90s. I don't know, I had left by then. And because one of the reasons was because the politics were just getting to me. Jack always, I think, resented that Leo got all the credit for Globex or took all the credit for Globex, and Jack wanted his name on there. For a while, he kind of froze Leo out of all the Globex marketing and policy decisions, and it just wasn't a good situation. Bill Brodsky, had to kind of referee a lot of this stuff, and it wasn't easy because two guys with really headstrong and big egos.
What did you do after you left the CME?
I went to the New York Stock Exchange, and I found that it was a very insular place to work. I was like one of maybe only 5 people from outside of outsiders they had hired in maybe 20 years. It was a very stifling place. After about a year and a half there, I realized this wasn't for me. And then I went into agency PR after that.